Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's edition of the Android Developer Interviews. My name's Reto. I'm joined here by a group of my colleagues, Fred, Dirk, and Jassem. And on air here, on the windows below you, we've got the team at Mobiata, who have created a bunch of great Android apps. And we've got them here today to tell us a little bit more about them. So let's start off. How about you guys tell us a little bit about some of the applications which you've built for Android?
All right, so I guess we can probably go in chronological order of the applications that we built. The first application that Mobiata released for Android, is there getting a bit of echo? Should I put on my headphones?
It sounds pretty good to us.
Okay. So the first application we released for Android was FlightTrack, which is a version of the Mobiata originally released FlightTrack for iPhone, and so the first thing that we did is take our flagship app and work it on Android. And that was originally released in November of 2009 for $4.99 in the Android market. And it was kind of a very simplistic application at the time. It was the first application that I had written for Android. And it ended up being a great success over time. And actually we've kept it up and maintained it throughout the years all the way up until now. And we even got the one of the 10-cent sales last winter, which caused our installs to skyrocket for a day.
What kind of impact did that have?
I forgot to do the math because I was going to do this. I wanted to know how much of a percentage increase, but basically our sales went through the roof for a day. I mean, who wouldn't buy an application for 10 cents? So we went easily into six figures on that day for sales.
Yeah, I know I bought a copy that day. Did you find it had a follow-on effect to some of your other applications which weren't priced so cheaply? Like, did you see a bump across the board, or was it just the apps which were cheap?
I'm not actually sure if I have that information. I do know that in general, whenever one of our applications gets a bump, we tend to see bumps in all the rest of our applications as well, as people just become aware of Mobiata as a company and look for other applications that we might be putting out. I mean, Mobiata in general focuses on all travel applications, especially applications that make travel easier. So it just is natural. If you like FlightTrack, you'll probably like the other applications that we put out as well. And then I believe the next application we released was Hotel Pal, which is a hotel booking application. It was kind of our first foray into phone booking. And we haven't really been maintaining it too much so in the last year, but it gave us a lot of ammunition, a lot of experience in terms of how to deal with hotel booking. And then later when we released Expedia Hotels, I think that Expedia Hotels ended up with a much better and stronger design as a result of our early Hotel Pal efforts. But Hotel Pal itself was very successful, I think, with a couple 100,000 downloads. And sometime after Hotel Pal, after Michael Pardo joined on, who's sitting at the Mobiata offices right now, we also created a version of FlightBoard for Android as well, which is kind of a variant view of FlightTrack. Like, FlightTrack tells you all about particular flights, whether they're early, whether they're late, what gate information, terminal, baggage check. FlightBoard kind of gives you a more longitudinal view of the data, so it tells you all the basic information on all the flights at an airport. So those are the four basic apps we have for Android on the market right now.
Very cool. In fact, we've got some technology which may let us actually have a look at some of these apps. It's not working quite as we had hoped, but hopefully it'll be good enough. So why don't we have a quick look at each of the apps in the order that you described, and you can tell us a little bit about the progression in terms of, from an Android development perspective, the things you learned and the changes that you maybe applied throughout each of them.
Sure. So you look at FlightTrack first then?
Yeah, let's have a look at FlightTrack first.
Well, I mean, one thing obvious here is that this is the tablet version of FlightTrack, so it's dramatically different from the first version, which didn't have any sort of concern for large screens. If you can shake it, it actually finds a random flight for you. Otherwise, I usually just look up a route that's pretty common, like SFO to LAX. We'll have a million flights every day.
Let's do a route, yeah. Departure Airport, SFO, LAX. didn't quite work. Let's try again.
Yeah, here. Are you hitting the? So when you type in SFO, click the airport on the right.
Let's try to shake it, right?
I tried to shake it. It didn't.
Okay.
It didn't love
Do
it.
you need to get out of the dialog box to shake it?
No, I see what I've done wrong. LAX. There we go. Boom.
All right. So then you see a whole bunch of flights on the left. So the basic flight list is almost unchanged from the original. I think that the very original, we're still figuring out Android design. So we kind of leveraged a lot more the menu button, and nowadays we've kind of made it more obvious, like buttons you can click on the screen. We've also kind of abbreviated some of it, like we used to have the words departed and arrived on the screen, and now we've kind of replaced that with iconography, which is, I think just gives you a simpler view of the data and also makes localization across many languages easier. Another big change is the original FlightTrack kind of had two tabs at the top. So right now you can see there's 3 tabs plus the map in the background. And if you look at the phone version, actually has 4 tabs because the flight map is one of the tabs you can look at for each individual flight. The original version only had 2 tabs, one for the map and one for everything about the flight. And so I think that what happened was that we would say, oh, we just got a new piece of data. We can now tell you how often the flight's going to be on time versus how often it's not. We thought that's really cool, and then we just take the scroll view and stick it in at another place. And about a year and a half ago, we decided to really rethink FlightTrack and do a full redesign and say, well, we're going to keep all the same data that we're displaying to users now, but really focus the idea. So if you go to the leftmost tab, like the tab that you see when you first open, it's really prominently got the information there. This is the time that it's leaving, and this is the time it's departing. This is the gate, and this is the terminal. Because that's what people care most about. It's also got, in order of what's most useful to least useful is where all the details come from. So then you have the tab on, the middle tab has information about, like, specifically when the flight's taking off, specifically when it's leaving the gate, the delay forecast of how often the flight's on time versus not. And that's information that users want to have, but they don't want to check it every single time they open the app. And so we kind of just streamline the experience so that you get just the information you want easily available and everything else not as much so.
Nice. All right, and let's have a look at the next app. So did you say Hotel Pal was the next one which got developed? Yeah, and so Hotel Pal looks like we never really optimized it for tablets, so what you're seeing right now is kind of just the phone version extended in every direction, so you can tell that each row has a lot of empty space next to it. But I think the basic design of just saying, here's a location, just type in a location and start spitting out information instantly. Like, it doesn't wait for the user to enter in all this information. Like when you go to travel websites, hotel booking websites, a lot of time it asks you for the dates that you're initially looking at and the dates, the number of guests, the location. And we will just kick you off with a current location search right off the bat. So you can start playing around with the application the moment it opens up. Nice. And actually what you're looking at right now is one of my favorite things. We have the list view that shows you the list of hotels, but we also have a map. And that is, I think, extremely useful because a lot of the times what I want to search for is not, it's kind of a study between both what is the cheapest and where is it in relation to where I'm going to be going. Absolutely.
And so actually, if you go into Expedia Hotels, like I said, this is kind of the version 1.0 of what we thought of for hotel booking. If you go into Expedia Hotels, it doesn't instantly kick you in, but it does make, if you just hit search hotels, it'll just start off a search without you actually having entered in any information. And so now that we've optimized it for tablet, what we've got is side by side the hotel list and the map. Nice. And so then you don't even have to switch between the tabs in order to find out what the cheapest is versus the location. And if you click on one of the hotels, then it brings up a few pieces of information about the hotel, so you can see the basic rates for the hotel and the location and it in relation to other hotels on the list all in one screen. And so actually it's become, whenever I'm booking a hotel now, Expedia Hotels has become my go-to location for at least initial research on where I'm going to stay.
That's really nice. I really like the tablet implementation you've done for all of those apps, particularly for Expedia Hotels and Flight Tracker. You talked a little bit about the difference in terms of design that you need to do when you're developing something for tablets versus phones. And I believe you have Google TV versions of some of these apps as well. Is that right?
Yeah, we have a Google TV version of FlightTrack, and I think I'll probably hand things off to Pardo since he's the one who worked on, or Michael Pardo since he's the one who worked on that primarily, if he wants to talk about that for a bit. I think it might be muted at the moment.
Yeah, if you're talking, then you're muted. Yeah, now we can hear you, yes.
All right, cool. So we've actually got Google TV versions of both FlightTrack and FlightBoard. FlightBoard is just a blown-up version of what you see on the tablet or the phone. But for FlightTrack, we wanted to rethink the design just because the TV is such a different experience. You're 10 feet away from the TV, whereas on the tablet or device, it's right in front of your hand. So you need a big experience. And also, it's more of like a left to right experience. So we have an action bar on the left instead of on the top. And then the list of flights going along the side, just like in the tablet version, and a map on the right.
I think one of the keys to the TV development was thinking about navigating using the keyboard or the D-pad rather than using a mouse. It's a lot easier with the Google TV to navigate with the arrow keys instead of trying to move a mouse around and click on things.
Sure, that makes sense.
And so certain interactions aren't available, like moving the map around is pretty difficult with a little touchpad, so you have to take that kind of thing into consideration.
Cool. Can you talk a little bit more about the challenges and opportunities around developing apps so that they are optimized for sort of all three of those form factors?
Well, I'd say the main advantage is just coverage. You know, if someone downloads your application, they don't feel like they're getting shorted by having, oh, this is just a phone app that's been blown up into a bigger size. Like, people, I think, really appreciate when they have an app that's designed specifically for tablet or an app that's designed specifically for Google TV. And that coverage then translates into overall, user happiness. Then more people want to download the apps. They tell their friends about it. But also, I think that the different applications have different use cases in different contexts. So, for example, FlightBoard on a small phone is a cool little toy, but it's not as useful as on a tablet or a TV, where it can really kind of like show off what you just like. You can really show off your tablet with this application. You really show off your TV. You can have it be like a screensaver playing in the background on your television. Whereas something like FlightTrack or Expedia Hotels becomes a lot more immediate on a phone, where you can just instantly access the data and book anytime. So.
And you've got a single APK for all three versions, is that right? So you pay for it once and you get the optimized version for each of the form factors?
Yep, definitely.
Do any of your applications have widgets implemented so that users can stick a widget on their phone tops or tablet tops or TV tops?
Yeah, I think all of our applications have widgets at this point. FlightTrack was the most natural one to have widgets, and I think we released it with version 1.0 actually, which has been evolving over time. There's actually, I think, is there more than one widget for FlightTrack now? I think we might have made a honeycomb optimized version as well.
Yeah, there
FlightTrack is the
actually
most
is
obvious thing where you.
Right.
Yeah, so FlightTrack is, we find what we think of as the most relevant flight to the user to try to make it easy so you don't have to go around configuring the widget all that much. And we say, well, what's the flight that you're just about to take off on? And if someone puts that on their home screen, then it'll always be showing them the information. They don't even have to launch the app in order to find out if their flight's on time.
Nice. Just having a look at them now.
FlightBoard, I believe we added a widget, which is essentially just the app itself, but you can put it on your home screen, so that makes for a pretty fun application of it. In Expedia Hotels, we have a widget that basically finds deals around you. So it'll poll in the background about once an hour or so and finds all the hotels that are currently around you and sees if any of them are a particularly good deal. And so that's useful. Like if you're on a road trip or something and you're just trying to figure out where am I going to stay, oh look, this hotel's going to give me some 30% off if I stay here and it's very cheap. So, although I think the Expedia Hotels widget we don't have working yet on the tablet, but we do have it working on the phone.
Very cool. So let's see. So in terms of, so one of the other things that you, which you mentioned, which I wanted to go back to, is that if you use a lot of iconography rather than text, that it makes it easy to do localization. How much have you gone into localizing your apps? Is it available in a number of different languages?
Yeah, that's been a push that we've made in the last 6 months, really, and we've seen a pretty big effect from it. Like, especially with Expedia Hotels, I just heard today that 48% of our downloads are from the U.S. and 52% of them are from elsewhere in the world.
Wow, that's
so
a huge number.
The translation efforts are basically getting us half of our downloads.
Wow, and have you seen that as a direct effect? So you've sort of seen a dramatic impact in non-US, non-English speaking country downloads based on those translations?
Yeah, definitely. And I've actually, like, it depends on locale too. I've heard that Japan in particular is really into the whole Expedia Android application. And so I mean, before we released it, we had no idea that this is what was going to happen. And just through the act of translating it, we got a whole bunch of new users.
Wow. That's a pretty easy way to get some new users. Very nice.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, with translation is not the easiest project. Like I said, one of the ways to head up the problem is to use iconography ahead of time. But obviously, a lot of our applications are very text-heavy, and there's certain circumstances where we found that the translation of a string, so we'll have a button that just takes up a small portion of the screen, and then we expect the word, you know, confirm to go onto that. Well, confirm in Canadian or French Canadian might be 15 characters long instead of 6 characters long. And so we actually ended up creating a text view that resizes text automatically to fit within a particular width.
Oh, nice.
I think that was the biggest challenge we had to overcome for a lot of the localization stuff, just so that we wouldn't have to worry about changing the design of our buttons with varying lengths of text.
Very cool. I was going to say, how did you choose which countries to localize first? I mean, obviously, different countries are going to have different costs associated and difficulty involved in different character sets and those sorts of things. You know, what did you use to figure out what the priorities should be?
Unfortunately, I don't think I was not involved with picking which languages, but I think we have like 18 of them, so we really didn't leave out many major countries in our original translation.
I think a lot of that can be kind of determined by looking at statistics too in the developer console. It'll give you a breakdown of the most used languages. That's a good indicator of your should be.
Very cool. So it was based more on actual downloads than on any sort of business decisions on where you knew you had existing customers and that sort of thing.
I mean, I think it was a mix of both.
Sure. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Okay, cool. Can you tell us a little bit more? Like you mentioned statistics, and I don't want to ask you anything uncomfortable, but it would be great to have an idea of you know, how successful the app has been. You know, so if there are any sort of metrics you can talk about in terms of success, particularly for a paid app like your own, to see, you know, how successful has it been, and how do you measure those sorts of things?
I'm not too familiar on exactly how, like I'm more the developer side of things, less on the business side and marketing side of things. I do know that in terms of analytics, we've used Flurry in the past for tracking how many people are using our applications. I think that the main things that we see is that, like I said earlier, we see a lot of app promotion. So one application becoming popular will cause another application to suddenly skyrocket as well. I think that, yeah, sorry. I'm not too familiar with all the different analytics that we use for tracking the downloads we have for our paid applications.
That's fair enough.
I do know that, I mean, the main thing, though, is that FlightBoard costs $3.99, FlightTrack costs $4.99, and there's an upgrade to FlightTrack Pro that costs another $4.99. And these applications have done very well for us. And so I do get a little irked when people talk about the 99-cent app landscape, because there is proof out there that there are applications, you can make high-quality applications that people are willing to pay for. And I think that our advantage is in making these applications extremely useful, extremely well-designed, and giving you support and keeping them up to date over time. so that people feel willing to part with more than $1 for an application.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's an interesting model you've got. So it's a paid app with a paid upgrade. Is that right?
For FlightTrack, that's the case, yes.
So can you tell
FlightTrack Pro gives you the ability to sync with TripIt. So if you have all of your flights on TripIt, we'll automatically pull those in and then use our tracking system to track whether they're early or late.
Right. So I noticed that the existing implementation is that TripIt upgrade is listed as another application on the Android market. I'm just curious, have you guys explored things like in-app purchase capabilities in Android?
We have added in-app purchases recently, but the original FlightTrack Pro predated in-app purchases by a year and a half.
Yeah.
So at the time, actually, it's essentially a simple key signature check. Do you have this other application installed? Does it match the installed key set? But I think Ardo's added.
Yeah, so now we have both in-app purchases for FlightTrack Pro and also the Pro app in the market. So you can choose to upgrade either way.
That's interesting. Have you found a particular pattern since you've introduced the in-app billing? Has that been as popular, less, or more so than people purchasing the paid upgrade as a separate app?
Unfortunately, I don't think I have that information on hand, so I wish I could speak to that.
No, not a problem. That would be definitely interesting.
Also, so I guess we'll see.
Yeah, well, we've definitely noticed a trend, I think, when speaking to developers that in-app billing seems to be quite a popular way for people to pay for things. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. Might check in with you again later and see if you've noticed a trend one way or the other.
I've heard there's a bit of echo, so I'm going to put on some headphones.
Let's see. Did you guys have any specific questions you wanted to ask? I've got a couple more, but okay. So a couple of the things that I'd be interested in. I guess the thing is, you've talked about the fact that you want to keep the app fresh, that you do regular upgrades and everything else. So what's next on the agenda? Do you have some great plans around some of the new features in Ice Cream Sandwich, or do you have other plans which you can speak about publicly? Would be really interested to find out what's next on the agenda.
I mean, I think we're certainly thinking a lot about all the different features we can add for the new versions. I mean, one of the things that we want to do a lot is kind of take advantage of how the action bar paradigm. I think we want to shift a lot of our applications to using that sort of paradigm shift with ICS. Just because we think that's a much more friendly experience. The menu button is a good experiment, but we find that a lot of users are more comfortable using buttons that are on the screen, and so we like the way that the action bar sets things up very greatly. In terms of future applications, I don't think I can talk to any specifics, but we definitely have some more things planned, and we just want to come out with more applications that help make travel easier for any customer.
Yeah,
I think
that sounds like a pretty good goal to me. Particularly,
I mean, it's kind of broad because I can't talk to the specifics, but.
Yeah, no, we totally understand how that works. All the really cool stuff you're not allowed to talk about, but we do appreciate as much as you have been able to say. And certainly as people who spend a disproportionate amount of the time during the year traveling, the apps that you guys have put together are really close to our hearts. So yeah, thank you, and keep up the good work on that one. What we might do now, unless you guys or Adam have any other specific questions that you'd like to put to the Mobiata guys, I might open this up to the viewing public and see if they want to join in and ask you guys some questions. So I'm going to disappear off camera slightly and do that. Perhaps while I'm doing that, it'd be really interesting to hear. So you guys started on Apple and moved across to Android afterwards. It'd be interesting to know, and excuse the biased question, but what are some of the advantages you found working on the Android side? Are there things which you found easier or better about using the platform, or even features which the apps can have which perhaps aren't possible on other platforms? We'd love to hear more about that.
It's certainly a loaded question, but I mean, it's something I feel very ready to answer because when I first joined Mobiata, I really could have worked on any platform I wanted to. And in fact, I did do a little iOS. I developed the FlightTrack for WebOS. But ultimately, I kind of fell on Android just because I found it to be the most natural platform for me. And there's a lot of features that have made developing the app easier. For example, in FlightTrack in particular, users want to know if their flights are up to date or not. Well, for FlightTrack for iOS, predating the push notifications, the only way you could tell them whether something changed with their flight is if they opened the application and ran it. Whereas with the initial version of FlightTrack, we could have an alarm running in the background to do periodic pulls on the flights that people care about. Just the whole ability to run an application in the background has helped us a ton. So you don't have to, there's all sorts of background services we can run that keep the app more responsive for the user and gives them better notifications. The whole home screen is great too. Like the widgets I love, especially the FlightTrack widget like I was talking about. We've also taken advantage of live wallpapers just to make some kind of fun toys. And overall, also I'd say that the fact that Android is open source has helped me immensely. Because a lot of the times I'll either see an application and think, oh my god, how did the browser do that? How did they get away with this find pop-up or whatever? And I can just go look into the source code and find out. Or a lot of the times I'll be struggling with some bug with some specific view, like a list view, maybe that I can't figure out how to get the dividers to draw properly. And I figured out, oh, I can actually just look into the list view and adapter source code and find out exactly what's going on there. And so that's been a huge boon to me as well for Android, just the whole open source aspect to it. Is there anything else that you guys in Ann Arbor, or can all of you like about Android in particular?
I mean, so I joined Mobiata starting Android development, from the get-go, and I think definitely the whole idea of intents is pretty awesome. Just the idea that you can basically, tap into any application or any sort of component and basically get a response back as to without having to worry about it. And I think there was a blog post about this. So I think that to me is probably the biggest. I mean, I just love how it's basically, so well organized and so well divided up. I wish every piece of software is so well divided up. I think it's pretty awesome.
Oh yeah, that has saved us a ton of time too, where we're saying, you want to be able to text message your flight status to someone else. We don't really want to write a text messaging application. Oh look, we can just send it off to some other text messaging application, and the user can pick. It can be their favorite one, or it can be the stock one. It can be whatever they want. So the whole intent sharing has been super helpful for us as well, not having to integrate directly with any particular service, saving us a lot of time.
Yeah, I'm always been a big fan of intents, so I'm always happy when apps make a lot of use of them, because I just think they're so powerful, there's so much that you can do. Yeah, it's really great to see people actually making use of them for some of that.
In fact, we share, if you basically have FlightBoard and FlightTrack, you can easily tap on any particular flight that you see in FlightBoard and basically open up FlightTrack, and we basically use intents to interact between our applications as well.
Very cool. Thanks for joining us, Jason. Okay, cool. So I've put the invitation out there. We'll see if anyone.
Actually, I had a question for you guys quickly.
Fire away.
So I noticed you had a bunch of nice UI polish on some of your apps. Like for example, on the Hotels app on the phone, there's the nice little "Do Not Disturb" swingy loading sign. I guess how and why did you prioritize these features ahead of, say, extra functionality?
I think, for one thing, we want to give users kind of a connection to the application. You want users to enjoy using the application. You want them to feel like this is a special application. It's not just another app they happen to be using. And a lot of the polish, I feel like we feel is essential. Like in the case of the swinging hang tab, That is a special case where we decided we really wanted to have that just because users enjoy playing with that. And sometimes hotel searches can take a while if you're searching a particularly busy location. Like if you search in London, there are just so many hotels there that it takes 15 to 20 seconds to return that. If the user is going to be sitting there staring at our app, they might say, well, this isn't worth my time. Let's just log out. Let's just go do something else. Let's go play Dragonfly or whatever. So the swinging tag in that case, we wanted to keep the user around, keep them enjoying it. But a lot of the times, a lot of our polish is just something that we find to be something like an essential part of the application. And a good designer and just a little bit of effort goes a long way in terms of making apps look great.
Yeah, I agree with that completely.
Very cool. So we've got at least one person who's joined us, Brion. Did you have any questions that you'd like to... Oh, he's run away. Oh. I guess he doesn't.
Brion's actually another developer in the Twin Cities, so I've met him pretty regularly at an local Android meetup.
That's
cool.
Nice. While we are waiting for folks to join, I have a follow-up question on the design team that you work with. Can you share with us a little bit on what's your process look like? What's your development process in terms of working with your design team and the engineering team to realize their design? Can you talk a little bit about that?
It's very back and forth. I think every application we started recently starts off with a brainstorm. And it's very exhausting, but extremely productive. Where essentially we get 5 to 10 people in a room, and we spend 2 or 3 days just bashing out every single initial idea for an application. So we say, Expedia Hotels, we need to have a way to search. We need to have a way for people to view the hotels. How are we going to handle tablet versus phone? How are we going to handle the booking process when they bring up the booking dialog and you need to enter in your name, your credit card, and app billing address, and all that junk. So that initial brainstorm kind of sets the outline for the whole application, and from there the design team will come up with initial mock-ups based off of what we all came up with there. And it's important to note that the initial design, we have designers and developers there as well. Like all of our developers have some amount of input to the design. We don't just have a spec that we work towards and slave towards and don't have any input on. We're actually pretty fluid on that. And then throughout the development process, a lot of what happens is the initial design will be good, but we'll want to make tweaks on it. And just pretty much any spot where any of our developers feel like, we came up with this original thing, but for some reason this is annoying me because, I don't want to have to flick this to make it work. We should turn this into a button instead. Well, then we'll, launch into a discussion, figure out a better way to handle that particular screen. So, like I said, it's basically 2 phases: the initial brainstorm, and then lots of iteration during development.
Oh, cool. Yeah, based
I think the other thing to add to that is just
that approach seems to be pretty effective. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I said the other thing that we try and do is basically make sure that, like every member of the team that we bring on is basically a product guy, because it's important for everyone to have like I think speaking to Dan, it's not like we hand specs or anything. Everyone wants to be, everyone is actually emotionally invested in the product, so it's a matter of everyone everyone feels pretty passionate about everything that goes into the product. And I think the initial design really helps in setting the tone for, how things are going to look thereafter. So pretty much what we come up in the brainstorm so far has always been like a great base to build off of. And what we see is what we start with is always what we end up with, just more refined.
Nice. I think it's a good approach. I think if everyone involved in the product really feels passionate and like they have a big part of the influence, I think you end up with a really good result. Let's see. We had Donald joined us. His video is muted. I don't know if you've got a microphone or if you'd like to ask a question, Donald. But if so, now is your time to shine. Going once. Nope. Alright, I'll assume he's just joined to listen in. Let's have a look. I wonder if there's what are some other questions we can ask these guys.
I've got another question.
Sure. You weren't so afraid we're going to ask us a question. You can ask us whatever you want. We don't care.
This time you can do it with an audience. It's easier to hold you guys to it if you commit to it on air.
So on the tablet Expedia Hotels app, you support landscape and portrait, which I think is fantastic. Can you talk a little bit about, I don't know, the technical challenges or lack of challenges if that, you know, building that into the app?
Oh, it's certainly not a lack of challenges. I mean, just from a purely design standpoint, taking what works in landscape and making it work in portrait and vice versa just is not the same. And this is not speaking towards Android or any other platform. Just the pure aspect ratio changes the nature of it. For one thing, just the way you hold it's different. If you hold it in portrait, you may only be using one hand. If you hold it in landscape, you're probably going to be using both hands side by side. I'd say that we may not have the most optimal way of doing it at the moment. We usually start with landscape and then try to figure out how do we keep the same feel of the application but now use it in portrait. And in some cases, that's just a matter of taking the existing UI and changing the weight so that, you know, this list view is a little smaller, this view is a little larger. But in other cases, it comes to shifting entire components around. So for example, with the Expedia Hotels, the initial screen shows you the search location, I guess if it's reversed, the search location, the calendar, and the number of adults and children that are going to be checking in. And so on landscape, that all fits nicely, but on portrait, if you make that all try to fit in one row, it's going to be all scrunched up and it won't work at all. And so we ended up splitting it, instead of being 3 cells next to each other, being 2 cells on top and then a third cell to the bottom left. So that was kind of the design part, was working from landscape to portrait and making sure that the general feel of the app, like you don't lose any functionality when you change. And from a technical standpoint, when things are on portrait, we found things to be a lot more squished. And in general, it was good for us to test on smaller screens to make sure that our design worked. And in fact, the bigger problem wasn't portrait, but actually the large screens. So with things like Zoom, the Motorola Zoom, you've got a 10-inch screen, you've got tons of space, you can pull off pretty much any design you want. But I've got, we all got a bunch of 7-inch tablets. And this presented a whole bunch of extra challenges, even on landscape, where we had to, you know, take different components, maybe scale them down just a little bit. For example, the action bar, we took the action bar, and instead of writing out the full name, like 4 guests, we would say, we'd have the little icon and then the number 4 next to it, just in the case of having a smaller tablet in portrait. So there's a lot of little corner cases we have to test for, essentially. Like once we had the basic design for landscape and portrait, then we went through and tested it and figured out, all right, what are the pain points now that we've done this? Especially on a 7-inch tablet, it helped a lot.
I would actually say for any app we make on the tablet, I mean, and we basically realized this, that essentially testing on a 7-inch tablet is key, because that kind of tells you how it's going to be flexible from a phone to a tablet. And at the same time, I also think that breaking up, I mean, depending on how you design your fragment, it also helps a lot in reorganizing components. Dan's definitely right that our design basically required us to, I mean, it was a pretty big challenge from a design standpoint, but especially down the flow, like on the booking page or the receipt page of the Expedia Hotels, it was just a matter of reordering some, you know, fragments in a layout, which was pretty seamless, because we basically knew from the ground up that we have to design for portrait and landscape.
It's interesting. So one of the things that I noticed when I was playing with all of the apps on my Galaxy Nexus is that it still seemed to use the old style, you know, menu button rather than the action bar. So, you know, I was wondering, given that you've got the tablet edition, which is all Android 3.0 compliant, but the phone version still doesn't use those new things. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about why that is, and if you plan to change that.
I think technically speaking, the reason why that's not the case right now is because our action bars predate Ice Cream Sandwich coming out. And so, especially in the case of like FlightTrack, that's kind of like a pseudo action bar. So we've taken the design, but it's actually just a view with buttons on it that looks kind of action bar-ish.
Gotcha.
And I definitely think in the future we're going to be moving towards more of the actual ICS design for the action bar. We just haven't had a chance to implement that yet. And how we do that, I think, is still an open question. Like, there's a few different options. You can go with something like Action Bar Sherlock. we can try to use a compatibility shim so that we're using the actual action bar in 4.0 and beyond, and then in previous versions be using our kind of pseudo action bar. I don't think we've settled on the solution for that yet, though.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah, there are definitely multiple feasible approaches when it comes to implementing action bar. So I do actually have a follow-up question on your previous comments about testing, right? So both of you guys have mentioned that you've tested your apps on different form factors. How do you decide which devices to procure in terms of testing? Do you go out and buy a couple hundred devices, or do you sort of identify the high-profile ones and go from there? Can you share a little bit on that?
I think it's actually been kind of haphazard at Mobiata in terms of acquiring devices,
Yeah.
to be honest. Like a lot of our QA people will come in and have a device with them, and then we'll be like, oh, great, now we can add a Droid Incredible. Now I can add a Droid 2. And in fact, I think just today we were talking about we're going to buy a bunch of new devices because to make sure that we cover all the different bases. In general, though, we try to design our apps without too much special code between the different devices, so we don't really run into too many problems of specific devices. We run into more problems between the OS versions, but not so we make sure to have a device for 2.1, a device for 2.2, a device for 2.3, but we don't worry too much about having every single device out there. That is, I think, an advantage of not working on games and stuff like that, because in games I feel like they have a lot more issues where it's specific OpenGL renders and stuff like that. We don't have to worry about that as much because we work mostly with views.
So in terms of so apart from the design side, when you are developing for the sort of whole ecosystem of devices, phones and all the different tablet sizes and Google TV and everything else, have you had a lot of trouble there? Apart from obviously having to optimize the design, has the implementation been reasonably straightforward? If you run into some challenges there as well?
Do you mean between phones and tablets, or between different versions of phones?
Well, all basically, different versions of phones and the different kinds of devices as well.
I don't think we've had too much problems between different versions of phones, just because if you just spend just the most minimal amount of time thinking about your layout, I like to think of it in terms of extremes. Like if someone takes this view and stretches it a little bit further or shrinks it a little bit further, will your layout survive? You just put a little bit of thought into that. Usually you can solve that problem with the phones because the aspect ratio doesn't seem to change too dramatically between phone to phone. Between phone and tablet, that's been a lot more of a difficulty. I think at this point we're switching towards using more of a fragment compatibility library design, and that'll make things a lot easier for porting view layouts between older phone versions and the newer ice cream sandwich. But up until this point, we've kind of taken the views and all the logic and all the functionality behind it and separated it from the activities themselves. Mm-hmm. And so as a result, what you end up with is, we can set up the activity for tablet and the logic for tablet, just those particular views, but underlying it, all the different aspects are the same. So the adapters end up being the same. The overlays that we use for the maps end up being the same. A lot of the logic for individual aspects of the UI will end up being the same. And we just have all these different shims that kind of you only have to. I guess the way I like to think of it is a widget or like a view collection. So you have a collection of views that you only need to access into it with one API, but it treats itself differently on a phone and a phone versus tablet.
Gotcha. Nice. Cool. All right. Well, we don't seem to have too many people wanting to join us live. I'm guessing that means that you've already answered all of the questions that anyone could have had for you, which is excellently done. What I will say is that perhaps if you guys are willing to hang around on the Google Plus comment stream, just in case there are people who are a little bit more shy and would prefer to ask their questions in text form, if you guys can sort of lurk around there and answer questions if they come in, that would be fantastic.
Sure, definitely.
Sweet. Okay, so I think we can probably wrap it up. So again, we want to thank you guys very much for your time, telling us about your apps and your experiences developing for Android. And And thank you very much for building such great apps as well.
Thanks.
Thanks for having
Thanks for having us on.
All right, see you all later.